This is a Headgum podcast.
Hello, this is Fake the Nation, where we talk about news, we talk about culture, and where we definitively unveil the age at which people become uncool. That's right, I'm your host, Negin Farsad, and I was born uncool, but I've dabbled over the years, and today, here on Fake the Nation, we will once and for all reveal the exact point at which you become uncool. It's a very exciting moment for America. We'll also talk about Jeff Goldblum and how he refuses to bankroll his kids. We'll talk about what happens in politics when we lose, and what happens next, and finally, talking to yourself out loud. Do you do it? And maybe more people do it than we thought. Today's panel is a very, very special panel, you guys. First of all, we're doing a Persian sandwich, okay? Because we have joining us for the second time. He is a candidate for Irvine City Council. He's also just like a fabulous person who is really insightful and funny and fantastic to talk to. And like I said, Persian, it is the, which is a major qualification in this show. It is the one and only Alex Mohajer. Hey, Alex.
Hi, Negin.
Sorry. سلام حال شما
خوبی عزیزم قربونت برم.
How do Americans say your last name?
They usually go with some variation of Mohoho, Mojaja, Mohajer, Mojaja, Mohajer is the kind of the closest, and I actually even say it wrong. It's technically Mohajer, but I say
that's which is what I said.
Yeah, but I say just Mohajer. It's easier.
Okay, Mohajer. Okay, great. Yeah. Just I want to be consistent because you are running, and we want people to know like what to look for. Yeah. Okay, we are also joined by the middle part of this sandwich, who is an old friend of mine. We used to do comedy together until he splintered off into the real world of politics. He is the special projects director at MoveOn.org. He's also, and he didn't tell me to say this, but I think I should point out, a many times author of books that you can find wherever books are sold, and the books are fantastic. And he's also, the founder of stuff like Drinking Liberally, which is like a movement to build social capital in the most fun way. And that's always what he does because he is so fun, funny, and smart. It is the wonderful Justin Krebs. Hey, Justin.
Oh, thank you. Fun, funny, and smart. Happy to be in this sandwich. It's the best place to be.
Okay, guys, before we get into the show, I just want to remind listeners, you can go to patreon.com/Negin Farsad, and then that's where we have our wild and wacky conversations. You get bonus episodes of the show every month for as little as $4, which is like, so it's not even inflation adjusted. That would have been like $8, okay? But we didn't do the inflation adjustment. We just kept it at a nice, even, fun $4. And so go to patreon.com/Negin Farsad to support the show. And thanks to everyone who does that. It's so delightful. All right, let us get into it with topic number one. Guys, there's actual data from a survey about the age at which people stop being cool. Now, I know. And we were just talking about this because Alex claims he's going through a midlife crisis, which I love. I mean, and it suits you. You look great in the midst of this crisis. Yeah. Now, before I like actually share the data, because I specifically didn't share it with you guys in advance, I want to hear from you. In your estimation, what age does a person stop being cool? Like, when do you stop knowing what's popular and what the slang is and who the pop stars are? Alex?
Well, I'll tell you how I'm navigating my midlife crisis.
Yeah.
Is that I feel like millennials are aging differently than our parents did, just by virtue of not having had kids at the same age. We're just like a little bit Peter Pan syndrome. So I kind of still feel like, although I am turning 40 next year.
Ew,
I know. It's so freaky to me because internally I feel like pretty young still.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know. So it just feels like that number has changed, or maybe that's just what I'm telling myself so I can sleep at night. But I don't think I think it's in your 40s now, probably.
In your 40s. Okay. Yeah. Justin, where do you think that number lies?
So one, it's an interesting premise. As somebody who grew up reading like a lot of novels, liking Star Wars, thinking improv comedy was cool. Arguably, I was never cool. So this question is a tough one. I would pin it not to a specific number, but for one strand of people, it is the moment you become a parent. I realize not everyone becomes a parent, so I will allow kidless people to determine when they stop being cool. I think it maybe is when you get a mortgage, maybe when you get a backache, a knee injury, something like that for the kidless. For those with kids, as soon as you have a kid and you have to start doing things like saying, "Hey, I'm a cool dad," well, then you're no longer cool because you're modifying it. And as soon as you have to like go, "Hey, that's nice stroller. You went with the upper baby, huh?" Not cool. Just you're not cool at the point that you're comparing strollers. You're talking about the sleep cycles and excretions of another creature. Yes. So I guess actually, arguably, somebody who owns a dog does those same things. That's the moment they stop being cool. They become a cool dog parent, no longer just cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Justin, I had a conversation with a 23-year-old like a couple of days ago, and I told him like about No Doubt, the band, and he had no idea who I was talking about. And the avalanche of existential crisis that came down upon me that these kids don't know our music acts from like the late 90s was, I felt very uncool.
So actually,
the weird thing about the music though is that like so much of it has come back like in regular rotation. So like they didn't hear about No Doubt, but then they may have heard about I don't know, the Smashing Pumpkins or something. Like it's unclear like what's resurfacing, and like we don't really have any control over how that gets resurfaced. Justin, you were going to say?
Well, I was going to say that Alex, maybe what you've just proven is that, in fact, that 23-year-old has not yet gotten cool. So, in fact, you've carried cool with you through the generations. I will say I recently had the chance, it was delightful, to do karaoke with colleagues of mine. And I am on the older set of people who work in digital campaigning. It's a younger person's game. And they were really impressed that I knew things like Alanis Morissette, because I guess she has remained or returned to being cool.
Oh, she's remained. Great.
Yeah. So... But there were a lot of songs they knew that I didn't know, but I just, hum along.
I maintain a very strong karaoke notes app and page, and I make a real effort on that note to like keep fresh new hits, so that in a karaoke scenario I can like do what I have to do to pretend like I know what's going on. Okay,
sing a little Ava Max.
Yes. Yeah. So Alex, here's the terrible news. This is because we all know you are currently 39, and the age at which you become uncool is 39. According to the data presented in this sketchy survey that was reported on by the New York Post. So this is all absolutely science, okay? But there you go. It's 39. And when it comes to feeling in touch, Americans are most confident around food. Like that 72% feel like really like in touch with food trends and what the food world is doing. 60% felt they were they sort of felt like they were out of touch with the latest music. 58% said they feel in the know when it comes to social media. So these are like some better numbers here. On social media, we feel more confident about
which is interesting because when I was that age, we didn't even have social media.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, it's so funny because we talked once on the show about like how much time you spend on your phone and all that stuff. And one of the panelists, I think it was Tracy from the Stacks Pod, said that she was really proud of herself because she did this whole program and she got herself down to only 2 hours a day on her phone. And I was like, oh God, I'm like less than 1 hour a day on my phone, and I still think it's too much, And so I'm like, oh, I actually probably don't really have a problem with social media, so I often feel like very out of like do not know what the memes are and stuff like that, because I actually try very hard and I apparently succeed at like not being on social media very much, you know what I mean? Because it makes me actively feel like horrible. Here's one area which I I felt for all of us, which I think this one's can be tough. Slang was the lowest sector for which people feel truly confident in being up to date. Only 40% felt just totally out of touch with slang, and that number even feels low. Like I feel like any 39-year-old, and what 90% of 39-year-olds, right, Alex, probably feel like they don't, they stay away from certain phrases just because
I
they're
don't
like,
know
am I
what you're
using
talking
it
about.
correctly?
I've got the Riz, Negin. Okay.
That poll strikes me as just really sus, bruh.
And now we're all officially uncool.
And now
Like,
we're
it
all
just
officially
happens.
uncool because also I feel like Riz was retired in 2023. Like I think we just missed the boat. And I feel like Sus joined it in those ranks. Anyways, okay, so there you go. 39 is the age. Readers, listeners, you're not reading this podcast. You're listening to this podcast. Although some of you, I don't know what you're doing. Okay, let me know. At what age did you feel like you became uncool? I actually think, and not to brag, but as a comedian, which neither of you two are, as a comedian, I feel like it's like a more age diverse like job, and I hang out with a lot of like 25-year-olds all the time, so I sort of like feel not like that I'm cool, that never happened, but just that I like don't feel so out of touch, right? Because comedians are supposed to kind of like know something about the world, like, so I feel a little like, I don't know, listeners are like, bitch, you're totally out of touch.
Yeah. I'm in politics now, obviously, and ran for office last year. And in the political world, I'm a toddler,
right.
39.
Yes, you're so young and hot. Yeah, totally.
It's hilarious because I've got a sciatica right now that's killing me, but I am considered an infant, and I'm like the young candidate a lot of time. Love that. And I'm like,
all right. Yeah. Well, and you know what? You look like you that Persian skin is really doing you wonders. Yeah, there it is. All right. Here's another like moment in culture from this week. Jeff Goldblum told CNBC, I guess that guy just has conversations with CNBC all the time. I don't know. He recently told them that his kids will have to bankroll their own damn lives when they grow up. They have to quote row. He said, you have to row your own boat, is what he said. Now, obviously, Goldblum is rich and connected. But if you were in his shoes, would you have your kids row their own boats? I mean, Justin, I know you have 3 kids. What's the plan?
I mean, first of all, I don't believe what Jeff Goldblum is saying at all. So, I mean, it's sort of like man describes fantasy world. How do you feel about the fantasy world he's describing? Also quoted in that article was Anderson Cooper, who, as I recall, is a Vanderbilt, discussing how important it is to row your own boat. So I had those kind of mixed feelings going in. Look, there's I guess, right now my kids couldn't row their own boat, right? Like if they were in a boat, they're 11, 9, and 9. The boat, I've seen them in boats. The boats kind of go in circles. It's hard to row. They can get knocked over easily.
They fight.
I get that at some point they will have a concept of how to row, and they have that concept now. But I don't see. Yes. Ideally, kids are growing up and forging their own roots, and ideally, they have the incentive to create or work. By the way, the incentive to work, that's really baked into this capitalist landscape that we've decided to adopt. But yeah, they want them to contribute to society. I want them to be good citizens. I want them to be good neighbors. I want them to produce something, whether or not it has to be aligned around financial capital. But I mean, is Jeff Goldblum saying he's going to like toss them out of the boat if they're not rowing? No parent is actually going to do that. You can insist that they row with you, but you're not drowning, you're not drowning them like kittens. I mean, what are you talking about, Jeff Goldblum?
Well, and also you mentioned Anderson Cooper. Warren Buffett, who has about $130 billion, says there are limits to what wealthy people should leave to their kids. He said, quote, leave the children enough so that they can do anything, but not enough that they can do nothing. Alex, what do you think about this, about these rich people telling us about what they're going to leave for their kids?
All of this annoys me. All of this annoys me. Like, my biggest resentment towards my own mother is that she didn't bring me into a world of wealth and privilege. Annoying. When you have to start from scratch, and if you have that wealth and privilege, like, shut up. Like, he's, it's impossible for that kid to not benefit from the world of privilege he's been born into. And so, yeah, much like Justin, I don't really believe Jeff Goldblum. And why does this article even exist? Who asked them this question? Like,
CNBC asking the tough questions.
For God's sake, CNBC, like we got nothing better to talk about. And then, the Met Gala was a week or two ago, and I read that the ticket was $75,000. And I was just like, that is more income than the average American makes in a year. And we've got a war happening abroad, and people are suffering, and this is what we're talking about. So this article and Jeff Goldblum irritate me, and then having a Vanderbilt Vanderbilt.
But also, I also think, and like as a parent, I think, Justin, you're absolutely right. It's sort of ridiculous to think that you're just going to be like, and fuck you, my child, like you're on your own. Like it's I think there's things that you could do. And like what my Persian parents did was they were like, oh, you have to get a bunch of jobs in high school. And then I had a couple of little jobs. And then in college, though, I had jobs. Like I waited tables. I put up posters for clubs. I had a bunch of weird fucking jobs. And that lasted through, I had a ton of jobs in grad school. So any kind of like random job you could pick up, I did those jobs. And it's, my parents could have afforded to give me money. But they just didn't believe in me, like having it that easy. So I think there's ways of doing it, but at the same time, I knew I had a safety net, So it's like I'm rowing a boat, but they provided the boat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
What I'd say to and I'm not in conversation with Jeff Goldblum. This is a quote from CNBC or whatever, but it's like, unless you're telling me that you're selling the boat in order to donate all that money to a campaign to tax billionaires at the level they should be taxed, and therefore create a safety net by which everyone gets a little boat. Or if you're not doing that, then acknowledge you're still going to have a boat, and your kids are still going to have a boat, and maybe teach them to invite more people onto the boat. Right? So it's like, It's like you have privilege. Use it. Don't pretend you don't have it, and don't pretend you're not going to pass it on. Think about how you can use that privilege best in the world, and think about how you can also raise your kids to hang posters for money. I hung posters for free in college, Negin. I had no idea you get paid for hanging posters. Yeah,
for music venues. Anyway, look into it, kids. Okay, folks, let me know, what do you think? By the way, I love having political people on because their answers are always see, the issue is taxation. And
let's see those tax returns, Jeff Goldblum. Then we can talk.
Exactly. All right, folks, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, the show will continue. And we are back, and we're ready with topic number 2. Okay, so let's dip our toe into politics. And so a little story. I was hanging out at my local coffee shop, and the latest New York Times Siena College poll came out showing that Biden is trailing in 5 key battleground states. We looked at that headline. We all had a collective sigh. And one of my friends said, he said, this isn't great, but I'm still very optimistic. But my optimism also comes with a preparedness around losing. And I thought that was such a great way of looking at it, because, this is the show that put out in 2020 and will again in 2024 t-shirts that said we're only doing optimism. But again, my optimism was it's not just an outcome focused optimism. It's just an optimism that has to kind of go with you throughout every phase of something that's happening. So I got to think about that, and at first I wanted to talk to both of you because you've both run for elected office, and you've both experienced outcomes that were maybe less desirable than you had hoped, and so I wanted to just first talk about what it's like to experience that on a micro level, and then we'll get into some Biden. So who wants to go first?
My personal experience with it was an incredibly gratifying experience. And even though we didn't win, because I ran for so for your listeners, I ran for the California State Senate this March. And, we didn't get past the primary. But even though we didn't win, I didn't feel like we lost. We really engaged people, inspired people, activated people to participate. So, there's more to it, I think, than just winning. It has to, your why has to be beyond just winning. And I now I'm running for the city council. So it just was the entry point into a different journey than I expected. I just think at the presidential level, the stakes are very much so higher. And especially when you're talking about the candidate that we're talking about seeking to come back in. So
All
for
right.
me,
Well, we'll get to that in a second. Yeah.
Okay.
So Justin,
but it's scary.
But first of all, I love the idea that your why has to be bigger than just you winning, because I think about like someone like Beto O'Rourke, and he's obviously now lost in very high profile races, I think 3 times now. And the interesting thing about him losing for me is not that he lost, but just like you said, he's activating a voter base in Texas that we had sort of abdicated to the Republican Party for no reason, right? And I think someone like him is he's so maybe he didn't win, but he kind of activated this base of voters that we just been ignoring because we're like, well, Texas is red, and so I feel like in terms of why, like that's like it's like a great service to your country. You know what I mean? Justin, why don't you tell us about your experience?
About my great service to our country? Unlike the Beto example you just gave, or the presidential example we'll talk about, I was running, and Alex, it sounds like maybe you were as well, in a place where the differences in the primary are politically not as great as the differences between Democrats and Republicans around the country. And so while, of course, I wanted to win, and it was a very gratifying experience running, even though I lost, and it meant that some of the issues I wanted to focus on or some of the work I wanted to do, I wasn't able to do in the way I intended. It wasn't a loss where you immediately need to get back up and keep rebuilding the party and building on that momentum for the next election, because the person who won was another progressive Democrat. And that's just not the case in Texas. And would not be the case if Trump beats Biden. So that would be the main difference that I'd say, that in some of these primaries, you can run, you can put your best foot forward. And there might be very clear differences. And there's certainly this year a number of primaries where members of the squad in the House of Representatives are being challenged around some very clear issues. But the difference of losing in a primary and being able to say, like, okay, we're still represented by someone who shares a lot of my values, versus losing in a general with starkly contrasting political parties. And you're like, oh, the person who got elected might believe in authoritarianism. I think those are very different scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, and I also should mention that Justin ran for city council, and I remember one of the things you guys, I don't know if you guys had a formal pact or whatever, was just to basically like be nice people. Like, right? Did you guys have a pact?
No, there was no formal pact. It was the first time that ranked choice voting was taking place in New York City. And there were 7 of us running for the seat. It was a primary, and unlike in California, these are partisan primaries. These were 7 Democrats in a very progressive district. And you could get ranked, and you could rank up to 6 folks. And so there was an incentive to remain positive, because maybe you weren't someone's first place choice, but if you don't go to try to scorch earth your opponent, you might end up being their second choice. My advice for anyone running in a ranked choice voting election: really try to be people's first choices. Turns out that's who wins.
All right. Well, okay. So thank you so much for sharing that, you guys. Now let's talk about Biden. So, I mean, the 3 of us here are Democrats. So like, there's obviously, there's like 1.5 Republicans who listen to this show, and I love you guys. But I should point out, so 74 million people voted for Trump in 2020, but 81 million people voted for Biden. Now, obviously, these recent polls came out; they weren't great. Like as in any election, your candidate could lose, and in this case, Biden could lose. So, Alex, what is there some kind of? Have you wrapped your head around that, or put anything in place around that for yourself, or do you have any advice for the rest of us?
I am still very optimistic that we're not going to end up with a Trump presidency. I have not done any emotional preparation for a Trump presidency. I can't let myself go there. I think there's a lot of discord in the Democratic coalition right now because of the president's handling of Gaza. And it makes me very anxious, but I also, I think when we just look at the threats that a Trump presidency poses in Project 2025, it's all so dystopian and bleak that I have to believe that the coalition will rally itself together, even maybe in some instances begrudgingly or with a pinched nose, and that's okay. As a queer person, I like to tell people to please check their privilege when they talk about a potential Trump presidency and how it's going to affect people you care about and people who are more marginalized and vulnerable to his kind of authoritarian, totalitarian tactics. So no, I haven't done any emotional prepping, and I have to stay in this mind space to stay sane.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that you said is that you're hoping that the coalition will hold. And I think like building that coalition now is the preparation for any kind of potential loss in the future, right? It's all about like how strong is that coalition, and then it just, because then later that coalition has to be activated for a groundswell of protesting and making sure our voices are heard as like weird things are attempted in Project 2025. So I do think like that's something, Justin, how are you feeling?
I similarly feel like we absolutely can and will win this, and it will take work. Move On is very much focused on how do you hold that coalition together, and specifically, how do we target what we call surge voters, folks who might have voted in 2020 but not in 2022, or voted in 2018 but not in 2020. There are a set of voters who fall off every election. They have the muscles to vote. They have voted before. We believe that when they turn out, they're going to be part of the Democratic coalition. And for one reason or another, they're by the sidelines. But when we talk about abortion, when we talk about climate, when we talk about remind them of January 6th and the attacks on democracy, they do swing back to our side. And so that's what MoveOn.org is very much working on right now. And I'm hopeful and believe, as you pointed out, Negin, Biden won by millions and millions of votes. Now, due to our system, you got to have those millions and millions of votes in certain 20,000 vote chunks in key states. But I believe we are going to have it. And the best thing we can do to prep is to win, and win by a lot. That said, I was struck by something Alex said about prepping, and it just made me think of the notion, you hear about these preppers, right? The folks who get ready for like the apocalypse that's coming, and like, what would like an emotional prepper be? What would be like, how do you stock like a lot of emotional stored like canned food? What is canned emotions that you would fill your closet with? So I'm going to be thinking about that. But the other thing I'll say is in 2016, as much as we knew that it was a possibility, there was no way of being emotionally prepared for what happened on election night and after. And yet people came forward. There was an outpouring of energy that next day. There was obviously the historic Women's March months later. And that led to things like defeating the repeal of Obamacare. So the resistance actually did turn into legislative wins, or in this case, legislative defeats for Trump and the Republican coalition, and ultimately the blue wave in 2018. So not that I want us to go that way, but we do know that with its back against the wall, the majority comes forward again. Let's just help them come forward before November.
So we heard, so there's a couple things. Actually, last week we learned after we were recording that Biden stopped a shipment of weapons to Israel. So there's a little bit of change on that front, which I thought was good. Although I guess it's, I'll obviously like it to be more like strident, but I do feel like I should mention that because we recorded literally as that news was coming out, and it didn't make it into the show. The other thing I should point out is we walked into the studio today. They announced that that Trump and Biden are going to debate. So Justin gave a big air quotes. They're going to debate in June and again in September. Justin, like, what are you feeling about that?
I'm just skeptical it will happen. I think that having a debate is actually great. I'm in favor of it. I know folks are worried about it for a number of reasons. I just think that there's so much room for the candidates to not agree to the rules, the moderators, the way the rules we followed. And we know that Trump doesn't follow the rules of the debate. And I'm not saying that following rules of a debate is the most important criteria one way or the other, but it certainly is a reason to not go share a stage with him and give him a national headlines. I think there's a lot of ways that people could walk away from this. I'm skeptical June 27th happens. That said,
you think it's like, so do you think because he's not a rule follower in general, like it's just a bad idea to do it?
I don't actually think it's a bad idea, but I think you need to have a sense of how moderators will control the stage. And if you remember back to 2020, it was a bit of a train wreck. There's a lot of interrupting. There's a lot of talking over. I mean, what's Biden's famous line? Just like, "Shut up, man," or whatever he said.
Yeah.
And honestly, America was like, "Yes, please, shut up, man. Come on."
Yeah.
That said, for all of the hand-wringing among Democrats of like, "Oh no, how will we look on stage?" Let's just remember a long history of people who were supposed to be great debaters and how they went on to the presidency, right? So Al Gore was clearly a great debater. John Kerry, clearly a Harvard-educated great debater.
Right.
Hillary Clinton, no one could be a better debater than her. So I wouldn't worry too much about this notion of like, well, Donald Trump's a national TV figure and Biden is too calm and too we don't know what will happen. Honestly, putting Trump up on stage where he has to answer questions about January 6th, about appointing the justices that overturned Roe versus Wade, and seeing that contrast, I do think is a useful thing for our coalition. And can it be fraught? Might it be boring? Might it be a train wreck? Sure. And it also might not happen.
Alex?
I mean, listen, how many federal indictments does this guy have? And January 6th. And now we're hearing all this testimony from Stormy Daniels in open court, detailed sexual testimony. I mean, it's like, there's so much potential to absolutely skewer him. But I also wonder if Biden feels prepared to really do that. And that would be a missed opportunity if not. And also, I do have concerns about whether or not we're normalizing an insurrectionist by even debating him on a presidential stage as if that this is normal. And it's really not. He is not normal. He's not a normal candidate. He was not a normal president. He shirked the rule of law, circumvented democratic norms and process, and he has no business. It's a travesty to have him on a presidential debate stage. I also think there's no political science to suggest that debates actually move polling numbers. Let's do this again. Here we go. If you're a person who drinks, then please.
As we wrap up the segment, Justin, is there something that listeners can get involved in at moveon.org?
Yeah, go to moveon.org, and we have an entire vote mobilizer program that is focused on what's called relational organizing. So the notion that you have the power by reaching out to people within your arm's length, within your cell phone inbox or contact list, those are the voters that need to be motivated. And the science does show, while it doesn't show that debates move people, it does show that people get moved by a friend of theirs reaching out to them, and the friend committing to making their own voting plan and asking you to make your voting plan has this like positive peer pressure cycle effect that actually gets more people to vote. So become a vote tripler with Move On.
Yeah, vote tripler. And then Alex, where can people learn more about your campaign? I have people in Irvine. I know, everyone's just like 2 degrees away from Irvine. So where do we go? What do we do?
Well, that's because you're Persian, Negin. And we are one of the Persian meccas here in Irvine.
That's true.
You can visit me at alexforirvine.com, and you can visit me on social media at Alex Mohajer, Mohajer. And I would love for you to come pop in and see how we're doing.
Pop in, see how they're doing. And I also just want to say, as we wrap up, the other thing that happened at this, when I was talking about the Siena poll with my friends at the coffee shop, this guy that I was talking to had just recently joined the local community board, and that's part of his preparedness, right? So it's like, get involved at the local level. I've been saying it for a gajillion years, but what is your form of involvement? My form of involvement is specifically with Tompkins Square Park, as everybody's heard me say on the show. So there's ways of like kind of taking the bull by the horns on issues that matter to you where you live, and I think that's also a really legitimate legitimate form of preparedness. Okay. This is the last thing I was going to say about preparedness. I did a show last week for the Immigrant Institute of the Bay Area. So they provide a lot of legal services for immigrants trying to figure out like how to get their green cards and like who face a lot of issues, whatever. And one of the things the executive director said to me is like, we're very hopeful for, for things to bode well for immigrants or whatever, in the future. But if there are forces out there that are like going to try and make things difficult for immigrants, we want to be prepared. So like, that's something we want to drive home for people who were attending this gala that I was emceeing. And I thought that was, I was like, oh yeah, all of these institutions around the country whose job it is to kind of like be the to launch a defense when things go down. All those people that showed up at airports during the Muslim ban, right? All those lawyers. These are organizations that also they are preparing, and maybe check in on those organizations too and make sure that they're preparing. All right, let us move on to topic number 3. Okay, so we read a piece in the Times from Jancy Dunn about how she is finally admitting that she talks to herself aloud all the time. Now, before we get into how this might be more common than we thought, are you willing to admit if you talk to yourself? Because yeah, truly no judgment. I happen to like not talk to myself aloud. Like I'm just not one of those people. So I was like, oh, this is interesting. Do people do? I don't know. So do either of you talk to yourselves?
100%.
Okay.
Actively and often. I also get in fights with people with myself. Like I say all the things I really wish I could have said, but I don't say to them in person because, I had to be polite or had to be a professional or a candidate. Woo! I get in fights in my car. And then I realize if someone walked by and saw this, they'd think I'm a freaking crazy person. And that's okay with me. I also sing a lot. I'm very active with myself.
Justin, do you talk to yourself?
I don't think I do. Maybe I do and I don't listen. I'm not sure. I think I'm more likely
I'm leaving.
I sing to myself. Obviously I have a dog, so I sometimes talk to the dog, which honestly is like talking to yourself.
Yeah,
talking to children
that's
is sometimes
what
like
I
talking
do.
to yourself because they ignore you. I don't know.
That doesn't count, Justin. That's your child.
But I do think talking to a dog is a form of talking to yourself, because I do talk to my dog, and I'll say something like, but it'll just be like, should we go get a coffee now or should we wait until, you know what I mean? And I'm like asking my dog, and he's looking at me. So I just feel like we're in conversation, you know what I mean? And I'm gleaning like feelings from his face. So I feel like I do, in that sense, I do talk to myself. The funny thing is, because I'm always going through bits and stuff in my head and trying to memorize like words and like scripts and acting jobs and stuff like that. Like there have been points like I remember this one time someone saw me across the street and I was like mouthing words like lines for something, and then they emailed me and they're like, dude, I totally saw you like walk across the street and you were like talking to yourself, like you were like silently moving your mouth or whatever. And I was like, oh fuck, like no, I was running lines, like, and that's not the same. So that is an embarrassing thing I do, but apparently it's very common. There isn't like hard data on it, but it's very common for people to talk to themselves. And here are some of the ways it can be useful. So Alex, you might be the most emotionally stable person on this podcast right now, because apparently it can quell anxieties. It can heighten motivation. It can cheer you up, aid in planning, and make an empty room feel less lonely, according to the psychologist who spoke for this piece.
Because I'm so alone. I definitely feel like it's therapeutic, and especially hashing out an argument or something that's sitting on your chest. It's like cathartic. Yeah.
Right.
Get to talking with yourselves, people.
Well, it's funny because my 5-year-old talks to herself, but apparently, like all early, it peaks in early childhood, and then it picks up again in middle age. There's a theme to today's show, and
I feel so attacked by you. It's like first I'm not cool anymore because I'm 39. Now I'm middle aged. Like this, I'm never coming back on this broadcast.
I mean, as evidenced by how much you talk to yourself, you're obviously middle aged,
and I'm apparently really uncool talking to myself, and I'm the only one. Great.
No, but I thought it was not. I mean, it does seem kind of like emotionally, like because even therapists say, like, if you're having an anxiety moment, like, talk to your anxieties and just be like, thanks for like giving me that flutter in my heart. I don't think I really need it right now. You know what I mean? I remember my therapist always telling me to do stuff like that around anxiety. So, there it is. You may be the most uncool person in America, Alex, but you may also be emotionally stable.
I'll take it.
Oh, here's another thing it does. It activates your verbal working memory system. So that's nice. But there is a point, of course, where if you do it too much and you have, this is what the psychologist said, if you do that and it's disruptive, and then you also have like 12 other quirks, then like you need to set up an appointment. You might have a little bit of a mental health problem. So okay, so there you go. About talking to yourself. All right, folks, that is the end of the show. And my God, would I love for the people of Fake the Nation to be able to follow you and all the wonderful works that you do. Yes, I would. Justin, where do they do that?
They can get involved in this election by going to moveon.org.
Go to moveon.org. And then I will also go to moveon.org. We'll do, who knows, maybe me and Justin will cook up some fun things that we do over this election season. And then we'll tell you guys about it. And I don't know, folks, point is, it's a great, great, great resource to get involved. Alex, where do people follow you?
Yeah, you can visit me at my website, alexforirvine.com, or on social media, anywhere you have social media, at Alex Mohajer, Mohajer.
Folks, definitely do that. I follow Alex on Instagram, and it's a delightful feed. So definitely do that. And folks, you know where to find me and all the things that I do. I'm gonna be, if you're hearing this on Thursday, I'll be in Chicago doing Wait, Don't Tell Me. So if you want to see a live taping, it's so fun. Come out to the Studebaker Theater in Chicago. There may be tickets. I don't know how any of that works, but there's a website that does. And I'll hopefully be announcing more dates soon. And otherwise, I want to thank, and I just want to remind listeners, go to patreon.com/Negin Farsad to support the show for as little as $4 a month. And then there's tiers above that. But again, you get free episodes, bonus episodes of the show that are so fun and so ridiculous. So definitely go to patreon.com/Negin Farsad. Also, don't forget to rate and review the show on Apple or Spotify. It really does help people find the show. And in general, don't forget to tell your friends about the show. We would love to find new people who are interested in our fun brew of culture and politics. And I would love to thank everyone who makes the show a possibility. That's our wonderful producer, Andrew McGuire. Thanks to Gaby Alter for our theme music. Thanks to everyone at Headgum for making the show a possibility. And if you have any thoughts or questions or ideas, you can email us at fakethenationpodcast@gmail.com. And otherwise, we'll be in your earballs next week.
That was a Headgum podcast.